Welcome to another episode of the Art of Feminine Negotiation. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and I am really excited to introduce Dr. Debi Silber today. Welcome, Debi. It's so great to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. And just for those of you out there, for our listeners, or those of you watching on YouTube, today we're going to be talking about navigating how to heal betrayal. Really interesting subject. Dr. Silber is an expert in that. And in particular, how unhealed betrayal impacts your health, your work, your relationships. And Dr. Debi Silber is the founder of the Postbetrayal Transformation Institute. I just love that. I think it's such a unique offering out there. She's a holistic psychologist, a health mindset and personal development expert. She's the author of the #1 best-selling book, The Unshakable Woman, and her forthcoming book, Trust Again. Make sure to watch out for those. And her recent PhD study on how we experience betrayal made 3 groundbreaking discoveries that change how long it takes to heal. And in addition to being on Fox, CBS, the Dr. Oz Show, TEDx 2 times, and more, Dr. Debi Silber is an award-winning speaker, coach, and author dedicated to helping people move past their betrayals and other blocks, preventing them from the health, work, finances, relationships, confidence, and happiness they want most. So again, welcome, Debi. Great to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much. Thank you.
And why don't we start with, tell us about betrayal. I mean, I think it's something, I love that you did a PhD on it. It's not a subject people talk about much. We used to kind of bury it like a little bit of a dirty secret where there's a little embarrassment and shame around it sometimes. So tell us a bit to start about betrayal. You know, why does it hurt? What does it impact? What does it create?
You know, you said it, there's so much shame and embarrassment around it. And something like betrayal, you don't study something like betrayal unless you have to, it's one of those things. And, I've been in health mindset, personal development since 1991, but it was actually, I had a horrible family betrayal. And you know how the universe works when you don't quite learn the lesson
Yes.
You were meant to learn, to get more opportunities. Well, I did.
Yeah.
And this time it was my husband, and devastated, shocked. I mean, anybody who's been through it understands that feeling. And for me, I was desperate to understand how the mind works and why people do these things and how I could heal. So I got him out of the house. And one of the first things I did, maybe what many people wouldn't choose to do, but I don't know, I enrolled in a PhD program. And actually, I'll tell you,
interesting approach.
Yeah, that was my healing plan. But one of the things that happens is we experience repeat betrayals when we don't learn that profound lesson we were meant to learn. And for me, one of them was I wasn't even on my own to-do list. It was always about everybody else. Business, 4 kids, 6 dogs. It's like it was never about me. Yeah. So this was that first move where it was like, no, you know what? This is about me. Anyway, so I enrolled in this PhD program in transpersonal psychology, the psychology of transformation and human potential, because I was transforming and he was on his own, but I had just become obsessed with that topic. It was time to do a study, so I studied betrayal. What holds us back? What helps us heal? And what happens to us physically, mentally, and emotionally when the people closest to us lie, cheat, and deceive? That study led to 3 groundbreaking discoveries, which changed my business, my family, my marriage, my life.
Wow. I can't wait to hear some of your input on this, because it's funny, as we were sort of leading up to this, and when I heard you speak about the subject, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. I don't know anybody else who speaks to it specifically as a niche market. And I think myself, I've had numerous, again, I didn't learn that lesson. So I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to hearing your tips. In my law practice, I've been an attorney for 30 years. I'd had my executive assistant who had come with me straight from high school, became very close. She was my right-hand person, appeared to be ferociously loyal. She asked me to be her maid of honor when she got married. She got married at my house. And then I found out she'd been embezzling significant amounts of money over a significant period of time. And when she knew, I started to suspect, she left with a garbage bag of all of the records of it, because she exclusively handled the accounting system. So I definitely understand betrayal and the fact that it can show up in different ways in our personal lives, in our professional lives. And it's such an important skill to learn how to deal with it. So I've heard you speak about post-betrayal syndrome, which I love that and I don't know if that's your name or if you've created that, but how do we recognize, Debi, if we're suffering from it? What are some of the maybe physical symptoms of betrayal or emotional and mental symptoms?
Yeah, well, that was actually because there were three discoveries, and that was one of them, that there is this collection of physical, mental, and emotional symptoms
Mm.
so common to betrayal. It's now known as post-betrayal syndrome. And it's so interesting because we've had over 8,000 people in the last year and a half, 2 years, take our post-betrayal syndrome quiz on our site to see to what extent they're still struggling. And what's so interesting is, I'm talking at every age, almost every country is represented. And there's a question that reads, is there anything else you'd like to share? I read every one of them.
Yeah.
Besides reading about the physical, mental, and emotional symptoms, people write things like, my betrayal happened 40 years ago. I could still feel the hate. My betrayal happened 30 years ago. I'm unable to trust again. My betrayal happened 15 years ago. I feel gutted. So we know, we've heard time heals all wounds. I have the proof. That's not true. Not when it comes to betrayal. And we have these symptoms. And here's the thing. We think that's normal.
Yeah.
And it's not. And I'm happy to share one of the other discoveries, which was that there are these 5 stages. What people experience, they're in a stage 2 or a stage 3. They have no idea what's waiting for them when they do certain things to move to stage 4 and stage 5, but people stay there for a lifetime.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you mentioned about the trust factor as well, because one of the problems that becomes this vicious cycle. Like, and I know for myself, I'm the first to admit it caused a real trust issue for me, obviously, as with a, and the problem is you realize when you follow that pattern, when you keep that lack of trust, you end up projecting that and you attract more of that to you, right? So until you're able to break those patterns and break through that inability to trust, you're going to continue to attract more of that into your life. And for our listeners out there as well, let me just say, Debbie mentioned about her quiz. I really invite you to go check out the quiz as well. You can find it at it's thepbtinstitute.com/quiz. We'll make sure to post it in the show notes as well and have the link for you to be able to go there and check out that quiz. So you've hinted, Debbie, about one of your other insights was the 5 stages from betrayal to breakthrough. So can you take us through that? What do we need to do to move forward and heal from a betrayal experience?
Sure. And it's so interesting. And just to back up, that's why I named the book Trust Again, the newest book, because and I actually have a 4-step process to teach you how to do that, because what happens is when we were badly burned, and you were, like in your experience, it's so common to say, well, that's it. I'm not letting anybody get close to me again. But you know what? Think about it. Relationships are based on trust.
Yeah.
And that's the foundation. So that's what's so shocking and painful, but it's also what we need to feel close and intimate. And so we need to, people ask me all the time, can trust be repaired? And I don't believe so, but I do believe it can be rebuilt.
Beautiful. Oh,
and
I
it takes
that distinction.
It takes a complete and utter death and destruction of the old, your old way, that old relationship, whatever it was. But when you do that, you're able to birth something so new and beautiful. So, yeah. So I can get to the 5 stages. So that was the second discovery. And that was, while we can stay stuck for years, decades, a lifetime, and many of us do, if we're going to heal, we will move through 5 stages. Okay. And now we also know, this is what was so exciting, we know what happens physically, mentally, and emotionally at every stage. And we know what it takes to move from one to the next.
Yeah.
With the stages too, you don't skip them, they don't change order, but you can move to a stage and stop. And that's what so many people do.
Okay. Yeah. And can you take us through just briefly? I mean, obviously I know it's a whole sort of more than we can do in the time that we have, but can you at least even in just a little brief snippet, let us know what are the 5 stages so people can start to wrap their head around the concept?
They will see exactly where they are when I share this. Okay, so the first one is like a setup stage. And this is what I saw with every single study participant, me included. If you imagine 4 legs of a table, the 4 legs are physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. What I saw with every single participant was a real heavy lean on the physical and the mental, and kind of neglecting the emotional and the spiritual. So what does this look like? It looks like we're really good at thinking and doing and not really paying much attention to the feeling and being. It's in the feeling and being, that's where our intuition lies. And we turn that down, and that really could have served us.
Yeah.
So imagine a table with only 2 legs, easy for the table to topple over, right? Yeah. That's where we are in that position. Stage 2, this is by far the scariest stage. This is the breakdown of the body, the mind, the worldview.
Yeah.
D-Day, Discovery Day. Here's
Yeah.
the day, like this was the day you discovered that
Yeah.
person working with you took
Yeah.
all your stuff. You'll remember it, right?
Yeah.
And what happens is now the body is in a state of alarm. You've ignited the stress response. You're headed for every single stress-related symptom, illness, condition, disease.
Yeah.
Your mind is in a complete state of overwhelm. You cannot wrap your mind around what you just learned. You're like, you were at my wedding. What you were? I hosted your wedding at my house. Like none of it makes sense, right? And your worldview is shattered. Your mental model, how you view the world. These people are safe. These are the rules. This is how it works. In an instant, it's shattered.
Yeah.
And a new worldview hasn't been formed yet. So this is truly when the bottoms out on you.
Yeah. Makes
Now
sense.
think about it. If you were walking down the street and the bottom were to bottom out on you, what would you do? You'd grab hold of anything and everything you could to stay safe and stay alive.
Yeah.
That's stage 3. Survival instincts emerge. It's entirely practical. This was where you said, where are the papers? Where do I, how do I,
Yeah.
But here's the thing. This is the place we get stuck because once we figured out how to survive, we think that's as good as it gets.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're there, and the longer we're there, the harder it is to leave because we also get lots of benefits, small self benefits from being there. You get to be right. You get someone to blame. You get a target for your anger, right? You get a powerful story.
Yeah.
You get, all this sympathy from other people. You don't have to do the hard work of learning to trust again. You're like, can I trust you? Can I trust your app? Forget it. I won't trust anybody. The longer you're there too, now you start thinking, well, maybe I deserved it. Maybe they're right. Maybe. And then we stay stuck.
Yeah.
If we're willingness is a huge piece of this, to move forward, grieve the loss, do all the things that it takes, we can move from stage 3 to stage 4. And this is finding and adjusting to a new normal.
Yeah.
You realize my old norm doesn't exist anymore. It's no longer an option. So this is like if you've ever moved into a new house, condo, office, apartment, whatever. Your stuff isn't all there. It's not cozy, but it's going to be okay. What you're doing is you're turning down the stress response. You're not healing just yet, but you're not causing the massive damage you were causing in stage 2 and stage 3. You're making sense out of it. And what was so interesting in this stage 2 was when you move, you don't necessarily take everything with you. Mm-hmm. I saw such a change in friendships in this space because as you're making new rules, as you're redefining who you want to be, your old friends may not have a place in that. If they're, not there for you, if it was a one-sided relationship, if they were all about gossip or whatever it was, you're like, you know what? I'm not bringing that into my new space.
Yeah.
That's stage 4. When you've settled into that new space, you feel okay there, you can slowly move to the 5th most beautiful stage, and that's healing, rebirth, and a new worldview. Yeah. Now your body starts to heal. You've turned down the stress response. You didn't have the bandwidth for self-love, self-care. You were surviving. Now you want to take better care of yourself. Yeah. Your mind, you're making new rules, setting new boundaries based on where you are, and you have a new worldview based on what you know now. And remember the 4 legs of the table, the physical and the mental? Now we're solidly grounded because we're paying attention to the emotional and the spiritual too.
Beautiful. Wow. I love that. And you know what's gorgeous about this, Debbie, is that it marries so beautifully with, because in my programs, like the Art of Feminine Negotiation, a big part of it is teaching women to step forward to negotiate with themselves and doing it in a way using what I call the R-Fit model, where there's that assertiveness, which it sounds like is part of yours program as well, rapport building, even with yourself, empathy, giving yourself permission to feel, having that flexibility, the intuition, to trust your intuition and to rebuild that trust. So it marries really beautifully with what you're saying. I love this. And how would you say for our listeners out there, how do they know if they haven't healed? Other than taking your quiz, how do we know if we haven't healed from a betrayal?
Absolutely. Great question. So you'll see it in a few different areas. For example, you'll see it in relationships where someone either puts that big wall up, they're not letting anyone get close to their heart again. That's an unhealed betrayal. Or they have repeat betrayals where the faces change, but it's the same thing. So it's unhealed if the faces change, yet it's the same experience. And you're like, what the heck? Why does this keep happening to me? That's why. So that's how you know in relationships.
Yeah.
You'll know it's a factor in health, where people go to the most well-meaning health experts, doctors, therapists, coaches, healers, to manage a stress-related symptom, illness, condition, disease. At the root of it, so often, is an unhealed betrayal. And you'll see it at work too. You'll see it at work where, let's say someone wants to ask for that raise or promotion, but their confidence has been shattered in that betrayal. So they don't have the confidence to ask. They're bitter and resentful instead.
Yeah.
Or they want to be a team player, or they want to do some collaborative project, or they want to do a joint venture, but they're terrified because trust is shattered. So
Yeah.
they don't. So you see it in every aspect of life, and it lingers and it follows you around like a shadow until you face it, feel it, heal it.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. And I want to just go back and emphasize for everybody listening out there as well. If you find yourself saying, because that resonated with me, let me tell you, if you find yourself saying, why does this keep happening to me? Chances are it's time to start looking inward and doing a little negotiating with yourself and getting some of the resources that Debi offers here to be able to tap into it, because the pattern, the consistency in that pattern is you. So yeah, why does it keep happening again? You've got that unresolved betrayal, and maybe it's time to start taking a look at it.
And I would say also, you also know if you feel like you're settling. You're not happy with your body, you're not happy with your level of health, you're not happy with your income, you're not happy with your relationships, but you think, well, you've resigned yourself to thinking this is as good as it gets. That's that classic stage 3. That's how you know you may have managed to survive your experience, but you are not healed, because there are beautiful stages of transformation waiting for you.
Yeah. And I think you touched on it, but just as you were saying that, I think it's worth exploring a little bit, because I think we are often are in denial about it. Like, and especially because historically, vulnerability is now getting a little more sort of acceptable and people are embracing it. But I think certainly in my age group, it was always that have a stiff upper lip, just handle it, don't show weakness. So we repress some of these emotions and we end up feeling like we've handled it because we've pushed them down. But I think it's worth exploring when somebody's pushing down and still has unhealed betrayal. How does that impact on the other relationships in their lives, in your experience, Debi?
It's with you like a third party. And here's the thing too, there were 3 groups in my study who did not heal. The group where the betrayer had no consequences, like let's say for the sake of the marriage, they didn't want to break up a marriage, or they didn't for religious reasons, for financial reasons, for fear.
Yeah.
They try to overlook it. Tell that to your broken heart. It does not work. All I saw was a further deterioration of the relationship, and that group was by far, hands down, the most physically ill.
Wow. Interesting. Interesting. And I assume, do you find in terms of other relationships, because I'm just thinking from my own experience as well, and so because I was that, why does this keep happening to me? And definitely finally had that epiphany that, okay, I'm the common denominator here. I have to start looking at, what am I putting out? When you approach people with an expectation that you can't trust them, they feel that and they respond accordingly. And what if, and I had people challenge me going, you can't blame yourself for the fact that your assistant stole money from you. And I'm like, I'm not blaming myself for it, but I'm also recognizing that we have a part in the relationships in our lives, whether how much we tolerate, but also maybe if I showed up differently in those subsequent relationships and didn't expect betrayal, didn't expect as a starting point that I couldn't trust anybody, maybe that would have allowed them to show up as a better version of themselves and we wouldn't have had that pattern repeat. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
There are so many different dynamics. The worst thing that comes of it is when you say, that's it, I'm never trusting anybody again. And, that's just such a deal breaker for you.
Yeah.
But there are so many, yes, we always want to take a look and say, how did I show up? What were the expectations that I have? But what I find more than anything is there's so much fear with us making a dramatic and drastic change. And that's why it keeps repeating itself. Betrayal gives you the most beautiful opportunity. And I know that sounds crazy, but it does. It gives you this opportunity of the way you were, the way you showed up, the way you walked into the whole scenario has to completely and utterly be lost, done, no more. And people are afraid to do that. So it's almost like, if you ever picture one of those houses, you ever see those houses where they just keep patching it up, patching it up, patching it up. At some point, level the house and start over, right? And it's in that patching it up, patching it up, patching it up.
Yeah.
You're so afraid of losing aspects of how you did things, but the transformation only comes when you're willing to let that go. You know, picture the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. It's a messy, ugly process.
Yeah.
It's not graceful. That caterpillar on like some random Tuesday is like, I'm done with this, and is willing to be deconstructed, emulsified, unrecognizable from what it was. And because of that, look what it gets to emerge as. We can only do that if we're willing to get messy, sticky, and uncomfortable.
Yeah. I so love that analogy, and I'm laughing, guffawing so hard because that is the situation in our house. The property that we live in now, we had bought this property and the property next door and planned on using one as a rental. So of course we did kind of, you know, a decent job, but not the way you do it up if you knew this was going to be your home. Then we realized like, oh my gosh, the view here is spectacular. Like I'm sitting here now looking out over this lake. You can't see another property for ages. And we're like, ah, crap. But instead of leveling the house, we kept patching and patching. And 15 years later, you're never really settle into full appreciation and happiness because you didn't build that strong foundation the way that you want it. So I love that analogy. I think that's gorgeous. So
you grow, but the transformation doesn't happen.
absolutely. Absolutely. That was beautiful. So why don't you share with us a little bit, if you don't mind, about, you alluded to the 4-step process to begin to trust again. Because again, that's such an important part of that negotiating with yourself piece, to be able to take some control and navigate that.
Yeah, you know, trust, I look at trust like a brick wall. You know, it can take decades to build, and in one earth-shattering moment, the entire brick wall is just torn down. And then think about it. How can it get rebuilt? The same way, and the only way, brick by brick by brick. So trust is precious, and once it's shattered, it's a monster to rebuild. That's why you can't repair that. You could rebuild it though, but you also can look at the rubble of bricks and say, there's just no way, there's just way too much work right there, and I just don't want to do it. But let's say you decide, you know what, I don't like living in this state of fear and this state of just not being able to trust anybody. What do? Well, the first thing you want to do is you have to, and this is going to sound crazy, but you have to rebuild the very foundation that trust was built on. So you want to just test this. And I mean with the simplest of things, like, will the sun rise? You're not sure. I mean, your world has been so shattered, you're not even sure. So you test it. Will the sun rise? I don't know. And then you see that it does. Huh, okay, I could believe that. Do that for a few days. And then the next step is you have to start believing in something bigger than you. Because especially when it comes to betrayal, we certainly don't trust our betrayer. We don't trust ourselves. So we reason, well, maybe I can trust in something other than me. So your inner guide, your highest wisdom there, your intuition. So what you want to do is give yourself opportunities to just trust your intuition. If someone is speaking to you, what's the sense you get? You know, our gut is like 10,000 times more perceptive than our mind. What's your gut telling you? You ever see those people like where they're smiling, but their eyes aren't, and not like a weird Botox thing. Like they're just, you know what I mean? There's something so incongruent about it. Trust that. When something feels just so right and so good, trust that. And you want to build that up, because now you're feeling a sense of safety and security. Then you want to take it to the next level, and you want to learn to trust yourself again. So you want to give yourself little opportunities, like, I'm going to make that phone call, and then you do. I'm going to drink that extra glass of water, and then you do. I'm going to call that friend, and then you do, whatever it is. And now you're showing yourself you're trustworthy. So you can see how when you rebuild the very foundation that trust was built on, you build in your intuition, you rebuild in trust in yourself. You could feel like these little invisible bodyguards around you. From that space, and only that space, now you could safely and carefully start trusting in other people. Because you have your internal BS meter a little sharpened and strengthened at this point.
Nice. Gorgeous. Okay. So recap then. So what's the 4 steps? We've got, so make sure for our listeners so that they've got this captured, because you're the analogy queen, by the way. You've got beautiful analogies. I love it.
I have so many analogies in the book because it gives you that picture of just everything you're trying to say. So, and anyway, so in Trust Again, it's all in there. But so the four steps of trusting again would be rebuilding that very foundation in the most simplest things in life. The second would be, you want to strengthen your intuition. your higher, wisdom, whatever you call that. The third, what you want to do is you want to learn to trust yourself. Trust that what you say you mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trust your own word. And then from that space, you could carefully trust in other people.
Thanks for that. That's beautiful. And I'm so glad you spoke to that issue about trusting ourselves, because I think as women, I mean, we do have, they call it women's intuition for a reason. I mean, we do have such strong intuition. And yet I think we've been so conditioned in recent history. And by recent history, I mean, the last few generations, it's like we've sort of bred the intuition out of ourselves that we don't trust it anymore, because I think so many women have bought into the myth that to be successful, you have to really adopt that more masculine energy, that we sort of eschewed those sort of feminine strengths that we have, whether in showing up and negotiating from a place of intuition and flexibility and rapport building or empathy. And the same in this process in betrayal, when we stop trusting ourselves and don't trust the intuition, the ripple effects of that are so profound. So,
and one of the most beautiful things I see when someone heals and they get to that state of post-betrayal transformation, and that was actually the third discovery, there is such a strength. And the same woman who was never able to speak up for herself and didn't have the confidence and wasn't comfortable at all negotiating, now is that woman from this strong, confident space that clearly knows who she is, what she wants, and just is speaking from like a whole different a new identity. And it's amazing to see.
I love that. That's beautiful. And part of that process sounds like it is that ongoing negotiation with yourself as you go through these levels as well at every stage. It's gorgeous. So what are some of the questions that people can ask themselves, right? To see, are they avoiding or deflecting or sort of numbing themselves from dealing with it?
Yeah, this is so interesting. Actually, the first TEDx that I did was on this topic, and this is how we sabotage ourselves. The second one was on, do you have post-betrayal syndrome? And what happens is, this is painful stuff to face. So many of us don't. So what we do is we use things like food, drugs, alcohol, work, TV, keeping busy, reckless behavior, so that we don't have to feel or face any of this, but it doesn't go away. And we do this until we can't. So here are 4 questions, and I would invite everybody to write these down. And that's my way of saying write these down. So the first one would be, am I numbing and distracting? If so, how? Call yourself on it. When you come home, is the first thing you do, put on the TV to desperately drown out the sound of your own thoughts? Do you go into the refrigerator, you're not the least bit hungry, right? Trying to just stuff the feelings, to stuff the pain. What's going on there? Number 2, big question. What am I pretending not to see? Am I pretending not to see there's trouble in my relationship? Am I pretending not to see my health is in trouble? Am I pretending not to see I hate my job? What am I pretending not to see? The third question, what's life going to look like in 5 to 10 years if I keep this going? Play it full out. Take that job issue, play it full out, 5 to 10 years. What's that going to look like? Take that relationship issue, play it out, 5 to 10 years. What are you going to have there? And play out that health issue, 5 to 10 years. Take it full out. What's it going to look like? And the fourth question, what could life look like if I change now? Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but transformation happens when you tell yourself the truth.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. I love that. So what would you say are your 300, and I mean, you've shared so much incredible information here. So, and obviously for everybody out there, I encourage you to go check out, obviously, the book on trust that's coming up soon. When is that anticipated, by the way?
We're open for pre-release right now. I saw it on Amazon for pre-release. So
very exciting. Okay, so check out Trust Again. So foundational to be able to trust yourself. And also The Unshakable Woman, where you're going to get, I assume in The Unshakable Woman, you talk about the 5 stages of betrayal as well for them?
No, that's actually more general. That speaks to any trauma. You know what it was? I wrote that so soon after my betrayal, and I just was not ready to share just yet. And I remember, I think it was Dr. Joe Dispenza who said, wisdom is the experience without the pain. And I'm like,
yes,
just not there yet. So Trust Again is the story, my study participant stories, where you could follow them through the 5 stages. I walk you through all of it. It's all in there.
Gorgeous. And what would you say? So in addition, obviously, to the 4-step process to trust again and your 5 stages of betrayal, to be able to get some understanding around that and navigate through those stages more elegantly and with better results. If you were going to give sort of 3 hot tips to people to whether from an awareness anywhere on the spectrum that you think would be interesting, what would some of those be for you, Debbie?
You know, the first thing that comes to mind is this: even though it happened to you, it's not about you. It's not about you. And it's so heartbreaking. We take it so personally. And that's why, you know, at first I was studying post-traumatic growth, which is like the upside of trauma, how that trauma leaves you with a new awareness, perspective, insight. But betrayal was different because I'd been through death of a loved one. I'd been through disease, but this was different. And I asked all my study participants and they said, oh my gosh, it's so different because it's so intentional. We take it so personally. So the whole self has to be rebuilt. Yeah. Rejection, abandonment, belonging, confidence, worthiness, trust. When you can heal from your experience plus rebuild all of that, not only did you experience post-traumatic growth, that's when you've experienced post-betrayal transformation. So what I would say is understand, just because it happened to you, it's not about you. Beautiful. Number 2, I would say, I believe that betrayal is one of the most painful of the human experiences. This was the person, or these were the people who had your back. Yeah. These were the ones who said, don't worry, when the world is crazy, I got you. Yeah. When you know, you can trust me, you could feel safe. This is your nest of safety. And that's the very person who shatters it. So there's a lot that needs to be fixed. There's a lot that needs to be healed here. And so that's the second thing. I understand the depth of pain. And the third thing I would say is, I know now, I mean, not only are you talking to somebody who's done it, wrote the book on it, I did the study. So I get how predictable healing can be with a willingness. If you're unwilling, you're going nowhere. But with a willingness, you want another analogy? Here's one more. You know what it's like? It's like that stage 3. It's like you're on a trapeze and you're hanging on for dear life. You see that other bar, you grab the other bar, but you're going nowhere unless you let go of that first one. Yes. When you do, we got you. Then you're headed for post-betrayal transformation.
Yeah. And beautiful. And I'm glad you gave that analogy because it really ties beautifully to the point you were just making, which is what makes it so hard to let go, is that the very foundation of betrayal is the person you thought had you and had your back and was going to catch you. You feel like there's no safety net anymore because the bottom just fell out. So I love that is actually a beautiful analogy that really marries that. And you mentioned post-traumatic growth, and then you talked about transformation. It might be worth just for the listeners who are like, hey, what is there a difference, or are they the same thing? What's the difference between post-traumatic growth versus your post-traumatic betrayal or post-betrayal transformation?
I love that question. There's a huge difference because, and originally that's what I was studying. I was studying betrayal and post-traumatic growth because I like the upside of trauma. Yeah. Trauma is just so hard. So I'm like, what can we do with it? Who can you be at the end of it? How can you show up differently, better, more empowered, whatever it is? But what post-traumatic growth is, yes, it's that new insight, that new awareness, that new perspective, but of any trauma. Yeah. But betrayal is different. Like, for example, if you lose someone you love, you grieve, you're sad, you mourn the loss, life will never be the same, right? Yeah. But you don't question yourself. You don't question your sanity. You don't necessarily take it personally. Beautiful. Because betrayal is so intentional. Yeah. It is a total and complete attack to the self. So if you need an equation, I want to give you an equation right here. Yeah. It's traumatic growth plus rebuilding the self. Yeah. And when I say rebuilding the self, I mean rejection, abandonment, belonging, confidence, worthiness, trust. So post-traumatic growth plus rebuilding the self equals post-betrayal transformation.
Beautiful. Okay, I'm glad I asked the question then. So hopefully you got that, because there is a distinction and I can see why that's important. And you're right. I'm thinking about when my dad died. You know, he died of a heart attack at 52 years old, big shock, rocked my world, definitely a trauma. You know, I repressed it, of course, acted like everything was fine, didn't deal with the grief, but it isn't that personal blame or fault or whatever, which totally changes the character of it, or at least our perception. I think it's important to draw the distinction because it's not necessary that the betrayal was intended personally against us, but our perception sure as hell makes it feel that way. So I totally get that.
And I just want to make sure everybody knows too, healing and rebuilding is always a choice. Whether you rebuild and move on, and that's what I did with my family, it wasn't an option to heal with them, Or if the situation lends itself, if you're willing and if you want to, you rebuild something entirely new
Yeah.
with the person who hurt you. And that's what I did with my husband as two totally different people.
Yeah.
Not long ago, we married each other again.
No way.
New
Oh
rings,
my
new
gosh, I
vows,
didn't know that.
new dress, and our 4 kids is our bridal party. But that can only happen
Yeah.
when both of you are
Yeah.
willing to completely let everything die so
Wow.
that a new something can be birthed.
I am so glad you shared that. And in particular, because one of the things I love so much about the work that you do and your programming and the valuable transformations that you make is looking at that upside. Because I think so many people, when they see betrayal and or trauma in their life, and they see that as sort of the end game and this massive brick wall that's impassable. And I love your gorgeous positive focus on the rebuilding, and particularly to be able to tear everything down and rebuild even with potentially the person who betrayed you is certainly a hopeful message, I think, for everybody out there. So
And I really understand how sometimes it's not an option. Like I said, with my family, not an option at all. And so many things come into question. But personally, for me, it was, if I can heal from something like this, because to me it was an absolute deal breaker. There wasn't one cell of me
yeah,
that was okay with betrayal, with the injustice of it, with all of it.
yeah,
But I said, if I can heal from this, I'm taking everybody with
yeah.
me.
It's gorgeous. I love it. My gosh, this has been so much to think about. And I encourage for all of you, this is the kind of podcast that you're going to want to go back and listen to again and then again, because you're going to pick up. Dr. Debi Silber has given us so many nuggets in this brief time together that you're going to be able to unpack them and unpack them and unpack them and find something new every time. And as you go along the process as well, being able to come back and revisit, because let's face it, as we grow and change and transform, the way we hear and see things changes along with us as well. So I really invite you to do that. And Debi, I'd ask you as well, I typically end off by asking my guests, or what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? And it doesn't have to be even in this area, in your area of expertise. It can be anything. I'm a big advocate about people really getting intentional about their mindset and being able to make intentional decisions about recognizing and having mindset shifts that can change how you grow and transform. So
I love that. You know, as someone who came from the most negative mindset, I mean, it was anything that went wrong, it was my fault. I didn't even know what I did, but it was my fault. Like, you know, it's just coming from that and mental and emotional abuse. And, you know, what I've learned is that you can rewire just about everything.
I love that.
And I'm not saying it's easy, but it's so worth it.
Yeah.
It's so worth it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you shared that, because that's a big pet peeve of mine. I think for so long, everybody was conditioned that, you know, your neural pathways are set when you're 7 years old. And I'm so glad now the science has got it. You can literally change the neural pathways in your brain with intention. So I love that nothing is set. That was beautiful. So thank you again for being with
Oh,
us. This has been so valuable. I've got great value out of it. I'm sure all of our listeners will as well. So thanks for joining us, Debi. This has been great.
thank you. I mean, what an amazing opportunity to just chat with you and share some information with, you know, with your audience.
Yeah, and I really invite for all of you out there, if you want to learn more about Debi, go check out her website at www.pbtinstitute.com. Easy to remember, the PBT is post-betrayal transformation, which is what we've been talking about together. So www.pbtinstitute.com. And don't forget, I'm going to be putting in the show notes as well, access to Dr. Debi's TED Talks and some other access, and the quiz that we promised you as well, so that you can make sure to grab the link and do her quiz. So I'm sure you've all got loads of value from this episode. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and make sure to share with anyone that you think could get some value from this message in particular, but generally about how to negotiate your best life. Because let's face it, who couldn't benefit from being able to overcome betrayal in ways that are healthy and allow you to build a new foundation and transform into the best version of yourself? So remember again to check out Debi's free quiz to see if you have post-betrayal syndrome. Link in the show notes again. And also make sure to join our Women on Purpose community. www.facebook.com/groups/Women on Purpose community. And that's a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms, so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom.